Well, in talking about artists and community, I think we're all aware that we have this myth or this lie of the lone creative genius that artists create best when they are isolated, when their angst is building. But the reality is that I think the truth is that creativity is largely a collaborative effort. That's not to say that we don't have individual times of creativity, but we need to draw on the resources of a community in order to be at our best. The inventor, Thomas Edison, um, is someone who was a very creative individual. He had hundreds and hundreds of patents for all kinds of devices that were credited to his name. However, the reality is, as a creative individual, he created an environment for a whole host of creative people. He's credited with creating the first idea of a research and development laboratory. Basically, it was a place in Menlo Park where all these creative individuals could work in a large open space with all the materials and tools necessary, where they could collaborate together, work together on various projects, sometimes even during the same day on a variety of different projects. And this environment continued to produce fascinating things that we still benefit from today. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, artists work generally in groups and communities. They had environments called studios. And Michelangelo apparently had 12 different assistants that he worked with when he painted the Sistine Chapel. I understand that he wasn't particularly excited about painting the Sistine Chapel, but did so because it was almost a direct order from the Pope. But at least he had 12 other people that learned how to paint in his style and worked closely with him. Artists such as Raphael, Rubens, Van Dyck, Rembrandt all had assistants. They all learned the master's touches, and sometimes today it makes it a little bit difficult to determine with certainty who actually painted certain paintings because they were so good at mastering the master's work. Giorgio Vasari was a Renaissance painter and architect who wrote a book in 1550 called The Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects. And according to Vasari, he used the idea of competition for the first time. The idea was that, according to him, one of the reasons why Florentine artists were so good was because they were in fierce competition, and this fierce competition kept them hungry. They all wanted these commissions, and that competition was good for art because it nourished art because it kept them hungry. But it's the whole idea of commercial art, I think, was what was beginning to develop. But it wasn't until the 19th century that artists began to work primarily alone because in the Industrial Revolution gave opportunity to buy paint already mixed in metal tubes or brushes that were already made. You could buy mass-produced brushes, or you could buy mass-produced canvases as well. You didn't have to stretch your own. But the idea of the lonely artist has the idea behind it of competition, and there was reasons. There was a sense of rivalry. There's a sense of pride. My daughter went to Savannah College of Art and Design. One of the things that she suffered from was the idea of competition because she's a relational person. She was making close friends with these other talented, creative students. And yet in certain classes, they put them in competition intentionally because they said the real world where you're going to live, where you're going to produce art, you're going to have to learn how to compete. And it put tension in the relationships. Now, I'm not saying that's all bad, but that was one of the experiences that was difficult for her to deal with. When we talk about community, I'm talking about a community that I define as a body of individuals with common characteristics or common interests within a larger society. And when we talk about a biblical community, I'm not talking about a need just for socialization or camaraderie, but I think that God designed us to be in community. It's where we work best. It's where where we're the healthiest, where I think we can accomplish the most. So in a few minutes, I want to talk about briefly about a biblical framework for a healthy community, and then elements that go into creating a healthy community, and then examples of what a community of artists can accomplish. So let me go through a biblical framework. A lot of this I'm sure you're familiar with, but just want to set up a framework for you. And I have to go back to the first pages of the Bible, back in Genesis. And the Lord says, it's not good for man to be alone. I'll make a helper for him who is just right for him. I think it's interesting to note that when God said this, man was already in a healthy relationship with God, his creator. And yet he still had the need, because God created him that way, to be in relationship with someone else, with someone who is right for him, someone who is his vis-a-vis. So here's all the animals that were brought to him. He gave them names, but still in Genesis 2:20, it said there was still no helper that was just right for him. Woman was created. Man's expression was, at last, this is what I've been looking for. He was created this way. Men and women are created to be in relationship, in community. But very quickly, we all know about how sin damages everything, and it certainly damaged and broke community. First of all, a broken relationship with God. We see that in the fear and the hiding from God in the garden. We see the finger pointing. It was the woman you gave me that gave me the fruit, almost blaming God for it. Genesis 3:15 talks about hostility between the man and the woman. And then moving into Genesis 4, Cain attacks and kills his brother. And then when God asks, where's your brother? Cain responds with a bit of arrogance. Am I my brother's guardian? Am I supposed to keep up with him? And in Genesis 6, it said that God saw the earth, that it had become filled with violence, and it broke his heart. And we see an expression of an unhealthy community it's an interesting one in the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. In Genesis 11, verse 4, we learn that they were unified in common goals, which excluded any reference or concern for God. It says that they wanted to build a great city for ourselves, a tower reaching to the skies. They wanted to become famous. They wanted to keep themselves from being scattered. No reference to God, just their own focus. And here's what I find interesting. God looked at that in verses 5-7, and he said, look, the people are united, and they all speak the same language, and nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. I find that fascinating, that they're united even in a broken world, even in an unhealthy environment. But the fact that they were united made it a reality that nothing that they set out to do will be impossible for them. So there's something about community, even an unhealthy community, which can accomplish tremendous things. But then we move into the whole idea of a healthy community. There's lots of examples. In the New Testament, obviously, we see a healthy community centered on Jesus. And John 17, I absolutely love. And one of the key things that I love about it is Jesus's focus on unity. And his disciples have been with him for these three and a half years. And he prayed, the final prayer he prayed was for unity among his disciples. So the same unity that we see an unhealthy example of it in the Tower of Babel. Jesus is praying for a kingdom of God-centered unity that reflects the unity he had with the Father. And this unity is displayed in God's plan in verse 23. And in verse 24, it talks about the prayer in Philippians chapter 2. We talk about community where we're told not to be selfish, not to just try to impress people, but to be humble, compassionate, to be like Christ. And then we go through the example of Christ. Though he was God, he humbled himself. And in Acts chapters 2 and 4, we see a healthy community that starts. We see people giving of themselves, giving of their property, giving of food, giving of what they have to share with the broader community. In Romans 12, we see emphasis on the gifts, but the idea of gifts are giving to others. The gifts aren't for the one who has the gift. The gift is for others that we give to. So it's a giving out, giving away what we have. So if this is all true, and I think that we can agree that a healthy community is one of giving, what are some of the factors? Here's my question. I want to get some feedback from people. What are some of the factors that block us from developing or seeking healthy community? What are some of the factors that you think block us from seeking healthy community? Well, let me move on, and we'll have some more questions. I want to talk about creating community. And I'm certainly no expert, but I've read and I've observed and I've been part of a variety of different communities, artistic communities, as well as church communities. So, but I want to start with a story. 2 years ago, we had an artist, a young artist, who was going to do an art expo at our art place downtown in Paris, and she was going to do it on the theme of home. Now, it involved photography, poetry, and installations. And one of the key the centerpiece on this theme of home was a Persian rug that she found on a street corner several months earlier. And it was large enough, and it was actually a pretty good quality of the rug. She rolled it out and she put a variety of different chairs and a coffee table in the middle. And every day in the art gallery, there her photographs were on the wall. Our other installations were in the room. Every day she would make homemade cookies and bring them in. She'd make coffee and tea and serve them to whoever came in. And she would read poetry. Every day she'd write at least one new poem and she'd read it. She'd invite other artists to bring their instruments and play, sing their songs, read their poetry, to show their paintings. She would listen to people. She would ask questions, and she'd listen carefully, and she'd introduce people to others that she was sure that they would connect with. And the people that came, it was fascinating because we were used to seeing 1, 2, 3 people in an hour that would come in and spend a little bit of time in the gallery. In her case, she had as many as 20 or 25 people that would come and they would stay. They would come with the intention of visiting for 20 minutes and stay for 2 hours. And in the meantime, they'd listen to poetry, they'd listen to songs, they'd interact with a variety of artists. Some of them were artists, some of them weren't. And when she left that show, it was fascinating to watch because people were coming by her last day there, sometimes with tears, saying what a wonderful experience it had been. And the people that were coming, some were Christians, most were not Christians. All of them connected with this artist in a tremendous way. One of the humorous things for me was there's an art gallery across the street in Paris. This is right downtown. Our gallery is right across the river from the Louvre. And we were in a neighborhood with a lot of high-end galleries. And the man who ran the gallery across the street was a well-respected gallery owner that was known around the world. And I had just a passing relationship where I'd say hi to him, and we'd exchange pleasantries once a month. Well, he came across the street. He grabbed this artist in his arms, gave her a big hug, and said, "I am going to miss you so much." And I had no idea he even had emotions. But somehow she connected with the people in the neighborhood. She connected with other artists. And so for me, it's an illustration of creating community. I don't think she set out necessarily to create this type of community. She wanted to provide an opportunity to interact with her art, but it created community partly because of who she was and how she went about it. But I think artists working in a community is a little bit like a good jazz combo, where you're playing off of each other. You know each other, and you're playing with using the best gifts of each of the people in the community. I think that effective communities require good leaders. And if we're here at the European Leadership Forum, I would imagine that many of us, if not all of us, have these gifts, or know people that you want to work with that have these gifts. So in creating effective community, people and relationships have to be at the center. Leaders intentionally make an effort at building and nourishing other people. Good community leaders are good listeners as well. Community leaders don't know it all. That's certainly my case. But they learn to ask a lot of good questions. I think Charles is a good example of that. You're always asking questions, Charles. And that's one excellent way of building community, because in asking questions, you're letting people know you don't have all the answers, but you're encouraging stronger participation when we ask questions. Community leaders invite other people in. They invite participation. Communities leaders provide vision. And it's not just up to one person to provide the vision, but usually it comes down to a key person or a key 2 or 3 people that provide the vision that communities thrive on. There's teaching and training that's necessary. In Exodus, we learned that Basel and Oliab, even though they were at an amazing range of creative skills, they also had the gifts of teaching others, of training others to do some of those same skills. And that's an important part of a community building exercise. Networking is important. Intentionally involving others, meeting needs, responding to needs, linking gifted people or gifts with and matching them with needs. Looking for assets and opportunities where other people might not see them. In the field of urban community development, we talk about an assets-based community. Let me try that again. Assets-based community development, or ABCD. We're used to, when there's a community, we're used to focusing immediately on the problems we're trying to address. We're looking at the deficits first. We might look at the fact that there's no money. We don't have government funding. We don't have the backing of local businesses. We don't have any money for salaries. Maybe there's too much risk involved to jump in. It's just a little bit too risky. Or maybe there's a sense that I need to control this so it doesn't go sideways. There's business stakeholders that if it didn't work out like we tell them it's going to, they'd be very unhappy and pull their funding. Maybe there's a lack of experience, etc. But when we talk about assets-based community development, we want to look first at people. We want to look at who are the people that are here? What kind of gifts might they have, big or little? Sometimes there's key people who can open doors, and they might not be well known. Like in the neighborhood of our church years ago, there was a woman that lived just up the street who was a school teacher, and she had taught school in the neighborhood all her life. She grew up in the apartment that she still lived in, and she was in her 70s at the time. But she was one of these key people where she knew everyone. So she was a friend of our church, but because she was a friend of our church, we met a variety of other people through her over the course of several years, which were really key in the development of our church community. So sometimes they might not be people that you would immediately identify as a key holder, but becomes a key person. In a deficit-based perspective, we're looking for assets like data or information or money. But in ABCD, assets are and leadership development related to people. Hang on, okay. So what can artists accomplish in community? I think it's important to note that although we can we have fun and we can accomplish a lot of things on our own, the kind of the importance or the significance of what we can accomplish, I think, can be multiplied or magnified by working in a community. A couple examples. There's a large Catholic church in Paris called Saint-Eustache. And Saint-Eustache is right next to Châtelet, at the heart of the city. And several years ago, the priest in charge and several of the artists in the church decided to do something unusual. They decided to make their church building available to young artists who had maybe got to be known in the music world, but not in a big way. And they had an opportunity to play their music in this large church, almost the size of Notre Dame Cathedral. And they would play any music that they wanted to. The one requirement they had was that the artists had to choose a hymn or a gospel music or a Negro spiritual or even an Orthodox hymn or something like that, that reflected the church building in which they were playing. And each musical group would play for a 1 hour set and would go for 36 hours. And the experience that they had was these musicians worked the hardest on finding and doing this one song. And it had an effect on them spiritually because they had to learn the origin of the music, where this came from, the roots of this song. And as they explored, God did interesting things in the lives of these musicians. And sometimes it was the highlight. One of these groups ended up in the album that they did after this experience. That was the key song that they recorded on the album, and it became one of their signature songs. Another example that you might be familiar with is Basel's Night of Faith. And I don't know if Beat is on this talk right here, Beat Rink, but you can always talk with Beat because he's the leader of it. And all the churches in the city of Basel, Switzerland, banded together to do a one-night art festival focused on artistic expressions of Christian faith. And they include anything from installations, concerts, theater pieces, and it's citywide, and the city backs it now and is excited about it. It's something that has become a major event for the city in June. And I encourage you to talk to Beat and learn more about that because he's the head of this artistic community that put this together. Another example is La Fonderie in Paris, something I'm quite familiar with, being part of the Fonderie for quite a few years. The Fonderie started about 20 years ago as a community of artists, which explores the link between art, culture, and faith. It's a community that meets regularly for mutual encouragement, to inspire artists' creativity and boldness. And they also seek to participate in the development of cultural and artistic projects. It becomes sort of like a greenhouse for the development of various artistic projects. One of the early events that the Foundry did made a big impression on me. I wanted to tell you about. At the time, the Foundry was located in an older church building in a transitional multicultural neighborhood. It had a large North African community. And in Paris, that would be Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisians primarily. So in this art festival, many artists lived in the neighborhood because the space was a little bit less expensive in this part of Paris. And all of the artists, about 200 artists in the larger neighborhood, would open their doors and be an open house. And the church decided to participate with the artists from the church, primarily part of the Foundry community. So they decided to, because of the North African neighborhood, they decided to celebrate North African culture. So the visual artists would paint paintings or did installations reflecting their understanding or color of North Africa. The musicians performed North African style music. Some of the North African members of the church would, they made pastries and mint tea free of charge to anyone who would come. There was a documentary film made by one of the artists in the community on the Tuareg people of Algeria. It's a 25-minute documentary that was outstanding. There was Oriental dance, Arab expressive dance that most Westerners would know as belly dancing. This particular dancer was a German woman who was a dance teacher, and her specialty was Oriental dance. And I remember thinking, what on earth are we going to do? We're using the sanctuary of this old church building and we're going to do belly dancing for North Africans. But it was an amazing experience because we had somewhere between 150 and 200 people attending that night. 2/3 of them North African, people who had never been inside the church building. They ate pastries and mint tea. They listened to North African music, and this woman got up to dance. And I remember watching her, and just before she began, she looked up and I could see her lips moving, and I think she was saying, "God help me," and she began to dance. And it was amazing. And the people were captured by this. And when they left, the North African people, many of them had tears in their eyes, and they were saying, "Thank you for loving and respecting our people and our culture." And they couldn't imagine a French church doing that. I couldn't either. It was an amazing thing that happened with that community. Another thing that the Foundry community did was they launched the Pavé d'Orsay, which I talked about briefly. And this has been, for 15 years, it's been a place to promote and encourage artists in various disciplines. Many of the artists who perform or take courses there are not believers, but the team of the Pavé d'Orsay are all believers. And we are there to serve the arts community with art shows, concerts, classical, jazz concerts, experimental music as well, theater courses, book launches, music practice, a variety of artistic things, all happening in the same space with art on the wall from the current show. So these are just some examples of what I think a healthy community can accomplish. Obviously, it takes a lot of work, but I know that some of you have had a variety of experiences, and I'd love to hear some other examples of how you've seen community at work and some healthy examples that you can share with us.